What if? What if things are not just the way we've always been taught? Hi, I'm Kathy Ann. Let's be Berean. Finally, we have made it to the last parable, and we are at the close of the history of the New Testament church. It is autumn as we near the close of 2017, and it also looks like we are nearing the close of the time of the Gentiles. Let's read together this last parable in Matthew 13, verses 47 through 50. Again, the kingdom of heaven is likened to a net that was cast into the sea and gathered every kind, which, when it was full, they drew to shore, and sat down, and gathered the good into vessels, but cast away the bad. So shall it be at the end of the world. Angels shall come forth, and sever the wicked from among the just, and shall cast them into the furnace of fire, where there shall be wailing and gnashing of teeth. Here we have, at the end of the age, the angels about to come forth, and sever the wicked from among the just, and cast them into the furnace of fire. There shall be wailing and gnashing of teeth. This sounds very much like the parable of the wheat and tares, when in verse 39, Yeshua, King James calls him Jesus, Yeshua declares that the reapers are the angels, and then in verse 41, Yeshua sends forth his angels, and they gather out of his kingdom all things that offend, and them which do iniquity. But there are a couple of differences. In the wheat and the tares, the householder tells his servants not to pull the tares out from among the wheat at that time, but to let them grow up with the wheat till the end of the age. However, here in the parable of the Dragnet, we see the fishermen separating out the bad fish from the good fish. Still, Yeshua reminds us that it is angels who sever the wicked from among the just and cast them into the furnace of fire at the end of the age. We will talk more about the kind of separating that the fishermen are doing in a minute. But first, did you catch a glimpse of the elephant in the room? In verse 48, the pronoun they. This is the first time we have a pronoun change. They drew the net to shore. We are the they, who Yeshua calls the fishers of men, in my case, fishers of women. Our work in the kingdom of heaven can best be explained by illustrating a couple of Yeshua's miracles. First, remember when Yeshua turned the water to wine? He told the servants to fill the water pots with water and then carry them to the master of the feast. Those servants had a part in Yeshua's miracle of changing water to wine. Here's another illustration of how we have a part in the kingdom of heaven. Remember the feeding of the multitude? Yeshua did not hand out the food directly himself. His disciples passed it out. We too can have an active part in the kingdom of heaven. We too can help gather his elect people. If you are to be a good fisherman, remember to remain inconspicuous. Do not take for yourself any of the honor or glory due only to the Lord. Success does not depend upon any particular man in the pulpit or out on the mission field. The end game is not mighty buildings, eloquent sermons, elaborate programs, or increased wealth, either in the church or personally. The aim of casting the net and drawing it in again is to catch good fish. Though primarily sent to the Gentiles, Paul preached to all that by all means save some. 2 Timothy 2:10 says, "Therefore I endure all things for the elect's sake, that they may also obtain the salvation which is in Christ Jesus with eternal glory. So, I said we would talk about the kind of separating the fishermen are doing. It is no reflection on the skill of the fishermen as to what kind of fish got caught in the net. There was both good and bad fish. But our parable does not say that once they got that net to shore, their job was done. The fishermen were to sit down and know which were good fish and which were bad fish. They cast the bad away and put the good fish into vessels. No, the fishermen have not usurped the job of the angels and cast the wicked into the furnace of fire, but they are separating the good from the bad and placing the good into vessels. Let's talk about that. First, it appears that the fishermen are engaged in some type of preliminary separation of the good fish from the bad fish prior to the ultimate severing of the wicked from among the just that is done by the angels at the end of the age. Second, although the net was full when they dragged it to shore, this was not all of the fish in the sea, just those caught by the net. And third, I doubt that many people believe the net is something other than the gospel. But if you do think that the net is something else, please become a Patreon subscriber and send me your ideas, because this is what Emet Library is all about. Sharing ideas and studying together and learning from each other. So, just as fishermen go out in boats and cast their nets into the sea to catch fish, we go out and share the gospel to catch the lost. The next logical step for fishermen is when the nets are full to bring the fish to shore, sit down, and start separating the good fish from the bad and place the good fish in the vessels. So, what is our next logical step after we have shared the gospel and people receive that gospel message? Is the shore church membership? And now we still have to separate the good ones from the bad ones? And what are those vessels anyway? My oldest son is an ordained minister who has his master's in theology. He's pastored churches and been a missionary to Belize. Of all the people I spoke with about this last parable, I think he gave me the best advice. He said to step back from the details for a minute and look at the overall picture. And he was right. This parable does have an aspect the others do not. In the parable of the wheat and tares, our view is of a field full of two types of grain. In the parable of the mustard seed, we see an herb become a great tree. In the parable of the leaven, we see a woman spoiling 3 measures of meal. In the parable of the treasure hid in the field, our focus is on a field where the treasure is hid. In the parable of the pearl of great price, again our focus is on a gem come out of the sea. But in this last parable of the Dragnet, we see individual fish being separated as to whether they are good or bad. One by one, each fish is scrutinized by the fishermen and judged to be good or bad. Then the good fish get put into vessels. So Yeshua is reminding us that in the end of the age, we will each be judged individually of the things we did, whether good or bad. 2 Corinthians 5:10, for we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, so that each one may be recompensed for his deeds in the body, according to what he has done, whether good or bad. Ecclesiastes 12:14, for God will bring every act to judgment, everything which is hidden, whether it is good or evil. Remember, no finger pointing on Judgment Day, I encourage you to be a Berean, because what if? What if things are not just the way we've always been taught? I'm Kathy Ann. Be blessed.